Welcome to the last part of module 3, that is iterations and comprehensions. So before we jump into the iteration protocol, we will try to understand who are iterators and who is iterable. Iterator and an iterable. These are two different things. Okay. So as I mentioned in previous videos on for loop can work on any sequence type in Python, including lists, tuples, and strings. To speak in proper language, the for loop works on any iterable object. In fact, this is true of all iteration tools that scan objects from left to right in Python, such as for loops, list comprehensions, and including map built-in function. So now enough of using iterable and iterator terms. Let us define what exactly it is. So an object is considered iterable if it is either a physically stored sequence or an object that produces result at a time in the context of an iterator like a for loop and a list comprehension. So in a sense, iterable objects include both physical sequences and virtual sequences computed on demand. So before we jump into the example, we will look into the concept of the iteration protocol. Okay, this is how an iteration protocol works. Any object with a trailing double underscore next leading double underscore method to advance to a next result which arises stop iteration at the end of the series of result is considered iterable in Python. Any such object may also be stepped through with a for loop or other iteration tool or iterator, because all the iteration tools normally work internally by calling double underscore trailing double underscore next leading double underscore on each iteration and catching the stop iteration exception to determine when to exit. So now one of the easiest ways to understand what this means is to look at how it works with a built-in type such as the file. Let's take file. If you observe the code snippet down below, okay, here it is. If you observe this code, file objects method read line. This is file objects method that read line. So you can clearly find out this read line method. So it reads one line of text from a file at a time. Each time we call read line method, we advance to the next line. At the end of the file, an empty, here it is, an empty string is returned. An empty string is returned, so which we can detect to break out of the loop. So this is what we call it as an iterable object. So then Now we are very much clear with the subtle differences between what is an iterator and what is an iterable. So, and iteration protocol. Now we will try to get the same from will try to get the same result using a simple example. For example, we'll take here we have an iterator, so that has a nearly identical effect of read line method. So the only noticeable difference is that built-in stop iteration exception at the end of file instead of returning an empty string. So with this, here it is, we got the stop iteration exception. So with this, you should be able to understand the read line method of files. Use the trailing double underscore next leading double underscore method to method under the hood to make this iteration possible. So here if you see, iteration protocol is nothing but using a next method and then iter method under the hood to make an iteration possible in front of you. So that's how it changes. So if you look into iter technically there is one more piece to the iteration protocol. That is when the for loop begins. If you look into this example, when the for loop begins, it obtains an iterator from the iterable object by passing it to the iter built-in function. The object returned by iter has the required next method. So I just want to emphasize with the same example. So what we'll do is here in this case, we will use much simpler example to understand this iteration protocol using manual iteration. Okay. So if we take a list L, capital L is equals to 1 comma 2 comma 3. Now instead of using the for loop, we manually iterate this object by following the steps of for loop. So what we'll do is initially here it is. If for loop was to iterate the list L, it passes an iter built-in object to the list. Now the object will be returned by iter as the required next method. This is how for loop internally process built-in sequence such as lists. So after connecting all dots together, it should make more sense. If not, we will code it and understand better in our hands-on experience, hands-on with our Jupyter notebook. So, but before we jump into the Jupyter notebook, so what I would like to emphasize is the interface is exactly what we call the iteration protocol. See, what you can see is you have an iterable and a next method and then iter method. All together is an iteration protocol in Python. So any object with trailing double underscore next leading double underscore method to advance to a next result, which raises stop iteration at the end of the series of results, is considered iterable an object. That object is called iterable. Okay. So now we will jump into the Jupyter notebook. So this is, we'll begin with the iteration protocol as usual. So the first one is inbuilt file iterator read line. So this read line method is an inbuilt file iterator. Let's do it. let's use an inbuilt file iterator and let's see how this works. And then we will make a manual iterator, will create our own and will compare the difference between an inbuilt iterator and a manual iterator that we have written. Why late? Let's jump right into the Jupyter notebook. Okay? Yeah. So here it is. So the first thing is what we'll do is we will generate a file object and write some text strings into it. This is our first activity. So what I will do, I will name this file as file1.txt and write it, and I'll process this file in writing mode. The processing mode is W, which is write. So, and the file handle. So this is where this is what I use it to handle that file. Okay. Now what I have done, I have used dot write method. I have used write method to insert some text strings into our file. Let's execute and see what's gonna happen. So how much we have? Uh, we have 43 characters that has been written inside our file. Let me add one more thing. I adore coding, and let's see, 58 characters are written inside our file 1. Okay, now in second case what we will do is we will add few more sentences to it. So this is again I use a write method to add few more sentences. This is to execute the iterable protocol consists of iterator and iterable. One more line I have added. This is of 67 characters. Okay. Then what I will do is I will add one more line. Again I used a write method, but this time it's a big line. It's a huge line. It's 121 characters. So I have but the thing is these are so total I have added 121 characters to file the file handler. So now what I'll do, so we have finished writing the file. Now it's time to close the file manually. It doesn't matter, you don't need to close, it is optional, but we'll close it manually. So what we have done, we have opened the file in a writing mode, we have written the file and then we are closing it. Let's close it. Yes, done. Our file got closed. Now the action begins. So now what we'll do is we will open the file in read mode. By default, if you don't give any mode, automatically by default it takes a read mode. That's why I haven't mentioned any mode here. So I have taken this file handle as file read. So now what we'll do is we'll begin reading lines inside the file. So what we'll do is now we will use a read line method. To do that, we will use a read line method to iterate the iterable file object. So actually the file is iterable. That's why we are using an iterator to iterate the file. I hope you got what I'm speaking. Okay. So now I have used now I am using read line, which is an iterator and which can iterate through an iterable object such as file read. So let's execute. See, the first line it has read is Python is compile and interpreted language. And next time, the second time when I executed, it is throwing this to execute the iterable protocol consists of iterator and iterable. And when I execute again, it has read iterable is an object which allows iterator to step into its content and extract each item one by one from left to right. So this is the simplest, easiest definition. I hope you get this definition. Okay. So this is how it works. So after all, after reading all the lines, there is nothing to read. So that's why it has come up with an empty string. You can see here it is an empty string. So now we will get the final line. Nothing is there. Okay. Again I will execute and we'll see. We will try to look anything else is left. Anything else is left? Nothing. When all lines have been read, so what else is left? It will just show you an empty string. So now what I'll do is, so we have seen an inbuilt method to iterate through an iterable object such as file, such as list, such as tuple, such as, so now what we'll do is, and so once the file has been exhausted completely, it gave an empty string. So now we will do the manual file iteration using trailing double underscore next leading double underscore method. So this is what, with this method we will do the manual iteration. So for that, what I have to do is, again the same process. We have to load the file in a read mode. So here I have used open built-in function and then file name. I have given, this time I will give again file1.txt and then in a read mode. By default it's read. It's all up to you to mention or not. So let me execute this. So now our file handler is fread, f underscore read. So now I will not use any built-in methods of file object. I will directly use trailing double underscore next leading double underscore method to read the line. Let's see whether it works or not. I hope it works. See, it has read first line. That is, Python is compiled and interpreted language. Now we'll see. We'll put this again. We'll execute. So we got I adore coding. Then continuation to execute the iterable and then this. And I'll execute again. So I got the third line of that file also, because we have executed, we have read this file using a read line method. That time we have found only 3 lines. Now also we got those 3 lines. Now once these 3 lines are over, then what else is left? That we will see. What else left for us is, it is just throwing an exception. What is this? What is that exception? Stop iteration. So that's how iteration works. So in a nutshell, basically we have done a method iteration and a manual iteration. So now in this case, manual iteration, when file exhausted, it throws an exception saying stop iteration. Now what is the difference? The difference, one is implicit and inbuilt method. Read line uses the trailing double underscore next leading double underscore method to do this operation. The whole process of getting the items one by one is known as iteration protocol. So now we will take one more example which is much simpler than handling with the file object. So that is, we will use for loop as an iterator and list as a iterable, and we'll see how it goes. So I have taken one list, the name of the reference variable. I have made one list object, that is Shiva, Vishnu and Brahma, 3 objects are there inside that, and I have referenced that list object to the name, variable name capital L. So now we'll use for loop, also known as iterator, to extract each item inside the iterable object list. So we have done so many times by now, so we will do it in a simplest way. And see here, this is how the for loop, which is an iterator, which has stepped into an iterable object such as a list, and then it extracted each item inside the list one by one. Okay, so this is, now we will do the same thing with manual iteration. So let us try to mimic the same iteration protocol which was implemented by for loop internally using iter inbuilt function and next method. These are the two inbuilt function and next method that for loop has used to do that iteration process on top shell. So now we will do it manually, and let's so again we have taken the same uh, list, that's our iterable object. So now what I have done is I have typecasted the list object. So I have used iter inbuilt function to typecast list. Now that list has become an iterable. So now what I can do is, that's the first step. So you pass list object L, capital L, into iter function so that it can be iterable. Now we will print I, and we will also print what is I. So in that case, if you see, the I is a list iterator. What type of iterator? It is a list iterator. You know L is list. Once you typecasted using iter, it has become a list iterator. That is the reason I have executed this. Okay. So now once you have typecasted, you have converted your object into an iterable object manually, then we will use our trailing double underscore next leading double underscore method to iterate through. So once the object is iterable, we can use this method to extract each item one by one. So we'll do it. So we got Shiva, then we got Vishnu, and sorry, we will do it here only. Shiva, Brahma, and everything is left. So what I'll do, I will execute this list once again, and then I will typecast it once again, and then we will do it here, and look here. Shiva, Vishnu, Brahma. So once all three are done, what we get is stop iteration exception. So this is how it works. So now at the end, what happened is a stop iteration. So here we have demonstrated how Python iteration tools such as for loop call these functions iter and trailing double underscore next leading double underscore method automatically, and how we can use them to apply the iteration protocol manually. So now we will move on to other different types of built-in type iterators. The classic way to step through the keys of a dictionary, for example, is to request its keys list explicitly. So here we have a list. Sorry. We have a dictionary and dictionary object, and the dictionary object have been referenced to a variable name called as capital D. Okay. Then after that, what I want is keys. So for that, what I'll do, I'll just use a for loop. It is our iterator, and I use key. This is a target variable or loop variable, and then membership operator, and then I have used a keys method of dictionary object, and I'll fetch keys. So I got the keys, and in print I have used values of that keys also. So then I got both the keys and values. And we will look into manual iteration again with a different example, or else the same example. So I is an iterable object. I is nothing but an iterable list. That's what we have typecasted earlier. Okay. Now, in spite of using double underscore, trailing double underscore, next leading double underscore method, we can also use next method. So we'll get it. Vishnu and what else we have next is voice.popen. It is a tool for reading the output of shell commands as iterable as well. So I will import OS. It is one of the module, and from that OS I will import a method called popen, and in with this popen and dir. So we use, with this example we can get the volume in derive. D is data. Of course, this is what the name of my D derive. Then one more. Then one more information. Then one more information. If you keep on typing, you will get information, information, and again. There, and this is something else. So this is how we used to get some information from your OS. So basically the OS module is used to communicate with your operating system through Python, and it consists of different attributes and methods to do the same. So now we will go back to the theory, and then we will look into the more concepts. So here, so we have done with the iterations, iterable, iter, and next method, and we will move on to comprehensions. So here what we will do is, so earlier in this video we have discussed how the iteration protocol works. Let's turn to a very common use case. Together with for loops, lists, comprehensions are one of the most prominent contexts in which iteration protocol is applied. So what we'll do, let's code using for loop to step in through a list. After that we will try to create same result with list comprehension, and we will see what is the difference between inbuilt iterator functioning and then manual way of doing the same. Okay. So here what we have done is we have used for loop, and then we got this result, and uh, what we have done is, next thing, we replace that loop with a single expression that produces the desired result. So if we discuss in brief about the list comprehensions, actually we met the list comprehension briefly in list object types in module 2, In Python, most people find that a list comprehension simply looks like a backward for loop, and list comprehensions are written in square brackets. You can clearly observe there because they are ultimately a way to construct a new list. That's why it's called a list comprehension. They begin with an arbitrary expression that we make up, which uses a loop variable that we make up, x plus 10 in our example. Just one example. You can see this. Here it is. The example is here. L is equals to, open the square bracket, and x plus 10 is our arbitrary expression. Arbitrary expression, and then we have a for, and then x is a loop variable, and then in is membership operator, L is our iterable object. So that's followed by what you should know, what you should now recognize as the header of a for loop, which means the loop variable and an iterable object for x in L. Okay. Now we need to collect only lines that begin with the letter P, adding if filter clause to the our expression does this trick. So there is one more example. Basically here we are discussing. Now in previous video we learned how to use a range, how to use a range to change a list as we step across it. You can see the example to a list which is modified using for loop and a range function. The same result can be generated with a single expression, that is what called a list comprehension. In second example, so actually we have discussed just now. In this example we have to collect only lines that begin with the letter P. So both will write in our Jupyter notebook and execute, and we'll see what is the result and how can we save the total number of codes of line. Then the next iterator that we are gonna understand is map function. So here is the case for the map built in we met with in the previous video. As with other iterators, you can force a list with the list object or list function if you really need one, but the default behavior can save substantial space in memory for large sets, whereas map returns an iterator, not a list. So a simple a map construction look like map and parenthesis. You enter a function inside it and an iterables. So this what it will do is it will map the each object to that function. So for that, you can see this example here. M is our reference variable and map of apps ABS inbuilt mathematical function. And then you have an iterable object, that's a tuple. And it has mapped this function to each and every item in the tuple iterable object. Once so then make an iterator that computes the function using arguments form and each of the iterables. So stops when the shortest iterable is exhausted. That's how it works. Then the next iterator that we are gonna look or we are gonna explore is JIP. So JIP again the construction is JIP and use parenthesis, and the first argument you will give is iterables, the iterable object. Then after that you will have a plenty of iterable objects, and one more is by default that we don't need to discuss much. So it yield this JIF function yield tuples until an input is exhausted. Now here let's take one example. The first example, so the JIP object yields n length tuples where n is the number of iterables passed as positional arguments to zip function. The ith element in every tuple comes from the ith iterable argument to zip. So this continues until the shortest argument is exhausted. This is very important to note. The shortest argument is exhausted. If strict, I have told you, in addition to iterable objects we give it as arguments. In addition to that we can also give one more argument, that is a strict. By default it takes false, and if strict is true and one of the arguments is exhausted before the others, it will arise a value error. So these are the examples we can clearly observe there. And then we have a Python documentation. So basically, like a food for thought, we must all know the way to find out and explore about each of these things discussed so far. So we Pythoneers call it as a Python documentation. It is like referring your grammar book to correct your English grammar and finding the meaning of words from English dictionary. So we can read it from in-file documentation. That is one option, such as when you add comments to your code, that time this type of documentation is called in-file documentation. In addition to that, we can use the dir function. The dir function, which actually lists all of attributes available with that objects, and we can use help pydoc, the help function which is interactive help and which gives a 2-line or 3-line understanding about the functionality about that object. So we have doc strings which are included with that. So this is also kind of in-file documentation attached to objects. And we have pydoc HTML reports. These are module documentation in a browser. You have to go to that browser and you have to find out. And we have the standard manual set that comes up with our Python installation or Python application. That is one. And this is official language and library descriptions. And there are plenty of web sources, online tutorials and examples, and so on, so on. It goes on because this is Python. Okay. So, and last but not least, published books, some commercially available reference textbooks. Those are some of the most important references we can take while coding our programs. So with this I would like to have a bit of coding practice, and then we'll get back to next session. We'll begin the next module. So before that, we'll begin with the comprehension. So I have told you, we'll do with the for loop. So our requirement is to step into a list or step into a list and then add 10 to each of the item. So what we will do, we'll use, this is our list object, and I use for keyword, then a loop variable, and in membership operator, then arrange a generator object. Now I have used augmented assignment expression or compound expression to do the further calculation. Now let's execute and we'll see. So basically, to do this, we have taken almost 2 lines of code, a compound statement we got. So in spite of doing it in a compound statement with indentation and all, we can do it in a single line. So let's see whether we are able to do that. If we are able to do that, then we will define what it is. So it is a list comprehension. We'll call it a list comprehension. So it opens with square bracket. That is the expression how it works. Opens with square bracket and closes with a square bracket. And inside that, first we'll write this is our target or target expression. It begins with an arbitrary target expression. So what I have done is I have taken that loop variable and I have added 10. So it has become an arbitrary target expression. Then I have used for loop and then I have used again. Initially I gave an arbitrary expression and then I have defined that loop x is here and then in L and it will steps into a sequence or iterable object, that is L. And now we'll see x plus 10 is an arbitrary expression and x is a loop variable, and now we'll see how it goes. So for now L is 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Let's add 10 to each and we'll see what we get. 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. So that's how this works. So if you see two lines of code, a compound statement can be converted into a single statement. That's how a list comprehension can save your code. Now we are able to replace the loop with a single expression that produced the desired result list. Now we will move on to list comprehension on files, specifically on files. Again here what we'll do is I have written a file.txt file. I have inside my file. This is the file I have, and this is what these are the number of lines written inside it. The Python is compiled and interpreted language, and this and then this. These are the 3 lines which are written inside it. And now using a list comprehension or some other way, it is up to you, but I want to read each line. Let's see how it goes. So that's why I have opened that file in read processing mode. So then I want to get lines from that file. So I will use a read line method to get each line. So lines, first I got Python is compiled and interpreted language. So it is giving a single line, only single line when I use a read line. So now what I will do is I will put everything in a list comprehension, so that I want to whatever letters it has, I just want whatever line it has, in that line I want to separate each letter from that line. I just want to strip all the lines, all the letters from that line. So for that, what I have used, the reference name is letter list, and then I have used list comprehension. Now line dot strip, this is our arbitrary expression again, and then a remaining for loop goes on. And let's execute and we'll see every letter we got, every letter we got. Then we will move on to extended list comprehension. So now we will discuss more in depth. So here what we will do is for loop. We will begin with the for loop nested in the expression can have an associated if clause to filter out of the result items for which the test is not true. So this is what we want from this. So as this is extended, so we can add if. We can also add else. But for now, we will merge our list comprehension with if condition. That's what we have done here. So here what I want is, I want a line, because I have 3 lines. I want a line which starts with C alphabet. Nothing, not even a single line starts with the alphabet, a C alphabet. Okay. So then we will see list comprehension with if condition. That's what we have done on top, but that is a file type object. So here we'll take much more simpler examples so that it would be very easy easy to understand for beginners. So first thing is list comprehension with if condition. So here what we have done is, res is our reference variable, and then the list comprehension has begun with opening the square bracket, and then the first one is, so here we are using if else both conditions. So when we use if else both condition, then the syntax of this varies. The syntax of list comprehension slightly changes. That's the reason I'm trying to explain each and every possible examples. So we'll begin with number if condition, and then a number is an loop variable that we have here, and then the first thing is if modular divided by 3 double equals to 0. If this is 0, that is our condition, else give no. If this condition satisfies S, or else you just give no. So now we have range 1 comma 5. So we have 4 numbers. So out of which, when each number got when you divide each number, if you get a 0, if you get 0 as a just a minute, reminder, if you get 0 as a reminder, then you print then that object should come as a S, and the remaining should be no. So you can see, that's how, if I put it by 2, let's see. So you got 2SS, because 2 divided by 2 is again 0, the remainder, and again 4 divided by 2, the remainder is 0. Fantastic. This is how you can incorporate, if statement as well as else inside your list comprehension. Then, so that's what list comprehension with if else condition with a different example. So here we have taken list of numbers, and then the first arbitrary condition is x plus 1. If x greater than or equals to 45, else do x plus 5 for x. Now the for loop goes like this. Now you have two conditions. The first condition expression is x greater than or equals to 45. That case you do x plus 1 expression, else you do x plus 5. Let's execute and see. 22, which is less than 45. So 22 plus 5, that is 27, and 13 less than 45, 13 plus 5, 18, and 45 which is equal to 45. So we just added 1 to 45, you got the 46. That's how you incorporate if else conditions with the list, and this increases the power of an iterable object. So now, for example, the following builds a list of concatenation of x plus y for every x in one string and every y in another. It effectively collects the permutation of the characters in two strings. Let's look into this. So this is another a type of comprehension. So here we have used two for loops. So we have gave an arbitrary expression that is x plus y. Now the first for loop takes the first iterable variable, that is x, and then second for loop takes the second iterable variable, sorry, loop variable as y. So now let's see. Now when I concatenate x plus y, so it happens like permutation and combination. First it takes x goes to abc and steps into it and grabs a and brings it out. You got a. Then at the same time, first iteration y goes into the element and brings out the l, and it will concatenate this. And then at the same time, the y goes for the m and brings and concatenate with the am. So like that, there we got a different permutation of these characters. You try, and it is a fun. It's a fun. You just have a lot of fun with this kind of uh, uh, list comprehensions. I hope you love this. Then we are moving on to a different one. So with this we have finished with the list comprehensions. Now we will be discussing about the range iterator. The range iterator. So range returns an iterator, not a list. So when I give a range function and an argument inside that, what we get is a range. So when I see, just a minute, what we'll do is type of R is a range. So now what we will do is we will make an iterator from the range. That's what we will do here. For that, as we have discussed earlier so many times, we will use iter inbuilt function to convert something, to typecast some object as a iterable or iterator, sorry, as iterator. So now here I have, now the I become our range iterator. So now what we'll do is using next function we can advance to next result. So under the hood the same happens for loops and comprehensions. That's why I'm trying to explain both the parts. We have done with inbuilt functions, and we are doing with our manual iterations also, so that it's very clear. But under the hood same happens. They will use same next method and same iter method. So 0, 1, 2, 3, once everything done, 4, 5, 6, and let's execute. Completely exhaust the range iterator. Once everything is done, what you got is stop iteration. So now we will move on to the map iterator, another iterator, the map iterator. So here the map returns an iterator, not a list. So if you see map, I have used absolute inbuilt function, and then I gave an iterable object -1 comma 0 comma 1. Now when I execute and see what is this, this is a map at this memory location. This is hexadecimal number system. Now let's see type of M. It is a map. So now let's try to execute and what it happens. So first one is -1. We have used absolute apps function and we'll see what we get. We got 1. So that means this inbuilt function got mapped to each and every item of that iterable object or sequence object. Then we got 0, then we got 1, and finally what we'll get, we got the stop iteration. So this is how it works. Now we will see the zip iterator. So the zip is the same, a one pass iterator. It is a parallel traversal, what it does is I have uh, I've taken a reference variable z. Now I want to zip two loops. Sorry, two tuples. One is the tuple 1 consists of names Krishna, Vishnu, Shiva, and the tuple 2 consists of the functions, the job roles of those names. Krishna, the avatar; Vishnu, the source of life; Shiva, the destroyer. So now let's execute whether see will it be mapped to each other. So the Z is zip and type of Z is zip. Now I want to see how they will be mapped to each other. As it is a parallel traversing, this zip enters into the first and second loop at the same time. It takes the first value of the first loop and then first value of the first tuple and then first value of the second tuple, and it will store it as a one tuple. So Krishna is the avatar, Vishnu the source of life, Shiva the destroyer. That's how our zip works. And let's iterate through the Z object. What all are there? First, Krishna, the avatar tuple; Vishnu, the source of life; Shiva, the destroyer. So all are done. So now what we'll get? Stop iteration exception, because this is manual way of doing. So with this, we have completed iteration. So before we close this session, I would like to discuss Python documentation. As we have discussed earlier, we use hashtag hash to comment, to include comments. These comments are known as in file documentation, and we can use the dir function, which is used to get the list of attributes available in object, attributes and methods. See, for example, our list is one object. So dir of list, we got all those things. In this, initially we have double underscore namespace, and then we have names without any double underscores. These are without any double underscores or underscores. These are all methods: append, clear, copy, count, extend, index, insert, pop, remove, reverse, sort. These can be used directly. We can use it. These are in global space. These are all defined in global space in that module. Whereas these are called private variables, which we cannot access. We cannot use it directly. So it is these are inbuilt. So that we will look into when we discuss classes and object oriented programming. In that time we will discuss various types of the private variable, protected variable, public variable, global scope, local scope, non-local scope. Everything we will discuss. So just keep watching, just keep looking for the next videos with the more excitement and enthusiasm. So I'm going to give you more as much as you want. And with this, I'm wrapping up this module 3, which is all about syntax and statements. And then I would like to I would like to request you to keep subscribing and then keep liking my videos and keep watching my videos and keep spreading word to all of your friends so that everybody can get benefit. And with this, thank you and see you again in next module.